You know, when I look around the Trap Music Museum, I see so much Black art.
Right.
And right now we're in the midst of the movement to protect Black art.
Right.
When you hear that, what comes to your mind?
Well, first of all, I think what we have to do is we have to question, why are these the only lyrics being brought into question? We have to ask ourselves, why is this the only art form that is spoken of being brought into court? I think that we have to kind of put ourselves in the minds of artists, and that's the problem.
Okay.
Because most people in a legal setting, they can't fathom the way an artist's mind works.
Okay.
And a lot of times people can't separate the reality from fiction. However, it's very easily done when we're talking about films. It's very easily done when we're talking about video games. The people who created Grand Theft Auto, they're not being brought up on charges. I think it's an attack on culture more than anything.
Why does hip hop oftentimes feel like public enemy number one in courtrooms?
Well, for one, because it's honest. Because it tells the truths that a lot of people who probably don't live in these conditions would like to believe don't exist. You know, they don't want to see themselves as being part of the problem. They don't want to see themselves as, you know, ignoring a community that needs help when they have an opportunity and an ability to help them. It holds the mirror up to society. You know, these are the forgotten ones, the forgotten voices that you thought that you had gotten so successful that you no longer had to see or hear. And now here you are hearing them louder than you ever thought you would. I believe it's that notion that causes hip hop to be under attack time and time again.
You have a lens of seeing movements take off before the rest of the world sees it pop off in the mainstream and on a global scale. When we say the Young Thug name, it's a brand that's recognized globally.
Right.
But this is an artist who you saw the craft from the beginning. What is it like to chase your dream in Atlanta, to start off with nothing, start off in Jonesboro South, start off in Zone 3, start off in Sylvan Hill with nothing, and you find a way to reach the American dream? Tell us about that come-up story and what you were able to witness with his success.
It would be likened to the idea, similar to the thought of walking in a store and buying a lottery ticket that hit the Mega Millions. You know what I'm saying? Like, to be honest with you, that's kind of what you're looking at, because, and if I compare his story to mine, I came up Center Hill, Baker Road, right up on Bankhead. I didn't know where a studio was. I had no idea. Outside of the cafeteria table or freestyling with my partners on the corner, I didn't know how to find my way to success. And it was just a series of steps and introductions and capitalizing off of meeting one person and impressing him, and then being introduced to another person and impressing them, and over a course or a period of time, I found myself in the light. And I feel that it had to have been that difficult, or even more, for Thugger. He didn't come from, you know, a family that knew how to get him in front of people so he could display his talent. So he kind of had to work a Rubik's Cube through a maze of obstacles to find himself in a position to not only where he could present his art to people, to where the people he was presenting to could actually understand the art he was presenting.
Because it was ahead of its time.
Completely ahead of it. It's still ahead of its time today. Not only that, once he found himself in a position to offer, to reach back and pull people like Gunna, man, these kids were running the streets lost. their parents had no true means of creating any kind or establishing any kind of wealth or sustainability for themselves. And through the vision, through the art and the execution of that art, a Young Thug, all of that was made possible. I don't really know anything about the other stuff that they're talking about because I haven't seen that, you know? And
but why isn't this story being told?
why isn't this story being told? Why is that story being told so much? And what I have seen is a young man bring himself, his family, and the people around him up from nothing. And he's been selfless in doing so. That's what I saw, what I've seen, what I have witnessed with my own eyes. We must go on what we have been shown.
When it's black men in America, is it often guilty until found innocent?
Absolutely.
Tell me
Absolutely.
about that.
I think that, you know, the black men have always been, you know, the criminals or the villains that society could hang their hat on. Anytime there's a crime being committed, if someone says a black person did it, they stop looking for any other options. But there's already a picture of a suspect in everyone's mind, and that person is usually black.
And next, we dig into the relationship between activism and hip hop and what inspires T.I. to step up and be a voice for his community.